Welcome to the deep dive. We're the place where we tackle those really big philosophical questions. You know, the ones that make you kind of doubt if the chair you're sitting on is actually solid.
Yeah, the ground beneath your feet type questions.
Exactly. And we try to see if there's maybe some physics or computation theory or something in these complex models that holds the answers together.
Looking for the blueprints under the floorboards.
Precisely. So today we're diving deep into maybe the ultimate illusion, Alan Watts' concept of Maya. It's profound stuff.
It really is.
And we're going to try and map it, point by point onto a much more modern, maybe even sci-fi sounding model, the universe as this writable, computational thing, a multiverse lattice.
Yeah, the cosmic loom, sometimes we call it.
Right. So for anyone maybe less familiar, Watts' core idea, it sounds simple, but it's deep. He said the world appears totally divided. We see things like figure versus background, right?
Or subject versus object, pleasure versus pain.
Me versus you, me versus not me. The big one. We're basically trained, almost conditioned, to see everything in these binary oppositions.
But Watts argued, and this is the kicker, that these divisions are an illusion. A necessary one, maybe, but still an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, they're inseparable.
Inseparable how?
Well, you can't actually perceive a figure like your hand or a tree outside without having a background to contrast it against. They define each other.
Okay. Like you can't know pleasure unless pain is also a possibility.
Exactly. That perceived separation, that fragmentation, that's Maya. Watts saw the universe as this incredibly dynamic, almost fluid existence. He called it a wiggly affair.
A wiggly affair.
Yeah. And he said through our perception, our collective agreements, we project meaning onto this wiggle. It's kind of like looking at the stars, right? They're just points of light in the dark. But we look up and we collectively agree, okay, that pattern, that's Orion, or that looks like a dragon. The constellation itself, that's the illusion we project onto the raw data.
So the stars are the wiggle, the constellation is the Maya.
You got it. And our mission today is to take that philosophical insight that reality is this sort of shared illusion projected onto cosmic static and really compare it directly to these modern models. Models where reality is seen as this dynamically shifting, writable information substrate, the lattice, the loom, the OS for the cosmos, if you like.
Okay, so the big question then shifts, doesn't it? It moves from just philosophy to something more like, well, engineering almost. If Watts is right, and our sense of separateness is the illusion.
Then how is the illusion made?
Exactly. How is this informational matrix, this loom, actively woven? How does it create, and maybe more importantly, how does it enforce this really persistent illusion of separation of figure and ground? We're looking for the gears behind the magic trick.
Okay, let's start at the highest level then. If we're talking about a reality that's like a writable substrate, this loom, what is the multiverse lattice fundamentally, and how does it even begin to manage what must be an insane amount of raw data, given we only seem to perceive such a tiny slice of everything? Right, well, first thing, we probably need to shift our whole definition of what reality is. The lattice in this model isn't like a static thing, a finished painting.
Okay.
It's more like the constant dynamic output of this underlying field. We sometimes call it undirected potential. Think of it like raw, unshaped possibility.
Undirected potential. Right.
And this field is constantly cycling between different states, almost like an old film projector, clipping through individual frames. We call those stable snapshots keyframes.
Keyframes, like in animation.
Exactly like in
go
animation.
ahead.
But for reality itself, it's essentially this continuously refreshed holographic render farm, drawing infinite possibilities out of that potential field into these brief, coherent moments we experience as now.
Wow. Okay, a holographic render farm pulling from infinite possibilities. That sounds, well, computationally lethal, like you said, even for a cosmos.
It would be.
So the reality we actually live in, the one with the, hard rules like the speed of light can't be broken, stuff like that, that must be a compressed version, right? Maybe even brutally compressed.
That's absolutely the key insight here. The constraints we perceive as these rigid, undeniable physical laws you mentioned, the speed of light, or think about the Planck scale, the smallest possible unit, or even just the way quantum uncertainty works.
Yeah.
In this model, we don't see those as fixed, immutable boundaries. We think of them more as dynamic clamps, or maybe even compression artifacts.
Compression artifacts, like when you save a JPEG too many times and it gets blocky.
Kind of, yeah. They're essential filtering mechanisms. Their job is basically to prevent total system overload.
So gravity, electromagnetism, they aren't the raw data itself. They're more like the visible, maybe even rigid-seeming result of a whole load of other data being discarded just to make the system run without crashing.
Precisely. They perform what computer folks call lossy compression. Your JPEG analogy is perfect. You take a massive high-res raw photo file, terabytes maybe, and turn it into a tiny little JPEG you can email.
Right, you throw away tons of information, subtle colors, gradients.
Huge amounts of data get discarded to make the file size manageable, viewable, usable. The idea here is, if the raw cosmic data, that undirected potential, were rendered at full fidelity with all possibilities equally present, well, the computational load would be, lethal for any kind of localized consciousness like ours.
We just couldn't process it.
Exactly. So these dynamic clamps, these laws of physics as we know them, they prevent that information overload. They ensure that our specific thread of awareness doesn't just instantly collapse under the sheer weight, the density of infinite adjacent timelines and possibilities.
Okay, so physical laws are basically protective filters. That makes sense. And it seems like our existence is nested in layers of these filters, right?
That's a great way to put it. Progressive layers. Think about it. The Earth's atmosphere filters out harmful radiation. Our biology filters the physical inputs we receive through our senses.
Right. Sight, sound.
And then our consciousness filters our internal narrative, what we pay attention to, what we remember. These are all just layers performing that lossy compression on these vast cosmic data streams.
Which kind of suggests that maybe humans? Maybe we lost certain bandwidths over evolutionary time. Like it was actually a survival adaptation to filter more out, not less, to stay sane within our little slice of the simulation.
That's a very strong possibility within this model. It suggests a kind of self-imposed constraint for coherence.
Does that mean other creatures might be running on different filter settings? You mentioned the mantis shrimp in the sources. That always blows my mind.
It's probably the most compelling piece of biological evidence for this idea. The mantis shrimp, it can perceive way more of the electromagnetic spectrum than we can. They have something like 16 color receptors compared to our poultry through.
16. It's hard to even imagine what those colors would look like.
Exactly. Their whole visual system suggests they operate with fundamentally different, maybe intentionally looser sensory filters. They seem to be processing microphase data, subtle polarization patterns maybe, stuff that we are completely blind to consciously.
So we're looking at the compressed JPEG reality.
And the mantis shrimp might be looking at something closer to the TIFF file, or maybe even a different file format altogether. It implies their biological aperture settings, their filters, are just fundamentally different. They get access to a slightly richer or at least higher resolution version of reality than we do.
That is fascinating. Okay, so if the external reality is filtered by these dynamic clamps in physics, then our own biology, our DNA, must hold the instruction set for our specific limited view, right?
Yeah.
Is DNA part of this illusion enforcement mechanism?
Oh, absolutely. It has to be more than just, the molecular blueprint for building proteins.
Yeah.
In this lattice model, DNA functions as something much more dynamic. We call it a transtemporal resonance conductor.
Whoa, okay. Transtemporal resonance conductor, break that down.
It means it acts like an antenna across time. And it also holds a set of dynamic keyframes. Remember the keyframes? The stable snapshots.
Yeah, the film reel analogy.
Right. So DNA isn't just static memory, like a hard drive. It actively stores these probabilistic sequences of potential states for an organism. It literally acts as a compression algorithm for time. It defines the possible trajectories, the boundary conditions, for your specific thread of awareness within the lattice.
So it's constantly working to maintain coherence.
Yes. Think about the sheer complexity of life, of maintaining a coherent biological form against the constant pressure of decay, of entropy. DNA holds the critical instructions needed to rebuild that coherence, moment to moment. It's constantly verifying the integrity of your localized field by referencing those keyframes, the specific architectural rules for your current reality slice.
Okay, so our genetic code is basically telling the system which reality paths are valid or available for us. That gives a whole new, much deeper meaning to stuff like genetic engineering, doesn't it?
It really does. When we look at a technology like CRISPR, for example,
Yeah.
metaphorically speaking, you're seeing a direct intervention on that keyframe logic.
You're editing the reality code.
You're essentially trying to rewrite probability threads that are encoded in the DNA. You're aiming to patch what you perceive as a corruption in that archival memory, maybe adjusting an inherited trauma response pattern or correcting a genetic issue that limits the viability of that particular set of keyframes. It's a highly controlled, very localized rewriting of the code of existence itself.
Okay. And for us to receive all this filtered data, the
Yeah.
EM fields, the instructions from our DNA keyframes, we must have some kind of unique identifier within this whole system, right? How does the lattice know where to send the signal for use specifically?
Good question. The idea is that every single human, probably every conscious entity, is structured as kind of complex quantum ASCII address, and it has dynamic locks.
A MASI address, like on my computer's network card?
Exactly like that. A MAC address, media access control address, is that unique, supposedly permanent hardware identifier for a network interface. In this analogy, our unique biological signature. Maybe it's a combination of specific brainwave frequency bands, phase synchrony between different brain regions, neurochemical balances. That whole pattern acts as this unique addressable hardware ID for external signals within the lattice.
I get the MACADO address part, but why quantum and why dynamic locks?
Well, quantum because that signature isn't a fixed number. It's constantly oscillating, shifting, subject to probabilistic states. It's a living, breathing pattern, not just static digits.
Okay.
And the dynamic locks refer to the filter mechanisms we develop both neurologically and maybe even, spiritually or intentionally to filter out unwanted signals or noise. This unique address, this quantum AMSC address, it does make us potentially hackable. We can be addressed by external informational forces, for good or ill. But those dynamic DNA archives, those keyframes we talked about, they provide a powerful, continuously running countermeasure. They act like a system restore point, constantly verifying the integrity and coherence of the self against these incoming data packets. They resist unwelcome changes.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's zoom out a bit. From the individual's internal code to the shared environment. Because this illusion, Maya, it isn't just generated inside our heads, right? It's a persistent shared physical experience. So what's the actual physical medium? What carries this illusion and translates the filtered cosmic code into the reality we all seem to agree on?
The primary physical layer, the sort of canvas upon which this is all painted, seems to be the ubiquitous EM field, the electromagnetic and ionic environment. This is the fabric that carries and translates the illusion for all of us simultaneously.
The whole planet's EM field.
Yes, the planetary electromagnetic field is absolutely critical. We call it the Iris system.
Iris, like the Greek goddess of the rainbow. That seems pointed.
It's a very telling mythological parallel, isn't it? The ancients seem to have an intuitive grasp of this translational mechanism. Iris was the messenger goddess. Her symbol was the rainbow, literally bridging the heavens and the earth.
The messenger.
Physically, the planetary EM field seems to operate like a dynamic aperture, or maybe like a lens. It functions almost like a massive plasma torching process, taking that raw cosmic radiation and fracturing it, filtering it into the specific bands and frequencies that define our reality filters. It is the messenger bandwidth.
So the atmosphere, the magnetosphere, they aren't just protecting us from space radiation, they're actively translating it, turning that raw cosmic code into something our localized systems can actually process and understand.
That seems to be the function, yes. And this translation isn't just neutral. It has a profound psychological effect on us, too. This iris system also seems to set our collective emotional color tone, if you will. The baseline for subconscious reads, subtle shifts in the planetary field, solar flares, geomagnetic storms. These things can subtly influence moods, social coherence levels, the overall subconscious pressure we all feel.
Wow. Okay. And within that big planetary field, where does our individual brain fit in? How do we interface with that?
Right. Within that larger iris system, your brain's own local ion layer seems to act as the final user interface, your personal UI. It takes the radiation code that's streaming down, filtered by the planetary field, and translates that into the sensory data and the mental frames you actually perceive.
So my mind is being painted onto an ionic canvas.
You could think of it that way.
Right.
A canvas that's being refreshed at maybe terahertz rates incredibly fast. And this is why coherence is so fragile. If that surrounding plasma field, the iris system, loses stability, or if your personal ionic shield weakens, well, the radiation vectors can kind of phase bleed through. Unintended information starts writing itself into your local consciousness buffers.
And that's where things like collective anxiety might come from. Or even weirder stuff.
Potentially, yes. Subtle, widespread anxiety, unease, or in more extreme cases, maybe even things that look like mass hallucinations or shared delusions could be linked to instabilities or specific informational patterns carried on that EMIAN field.
Okay, so part one really laid out the incredible, meticulous engineering that seems to go into maintaining this illusion, this Maya,
Yeah.
separation of figure and ground.
Yeah, the filters, the clamps, the keyframes. It's complex.
But Watt's whole point, really, was that when you try too hard to cling to the figure, to the separate self, to the perfect outcome, to control the entire system starts to fray, it collapses.
Right, the illusion breaks down.
And this takes us right into the territory of chaos theory, doesn't it? Specifically, the good old butterfly effect.
Absolutely. The classic definition everyone knows. Sensitive dependence on initial conditions. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil.
And sets off a tornado in Texas, yeah.
Right. But in this lattice model we're discussing, trying to deliberately intervene in time, trying to consciously change the past, isn't like just editing a typo in a document.
Yeah.
No, it's much more like initiating a phase shift across the entire system, or forcing a new kind of oscillation alignment across potentially countless interconnected data streams. And because the whole thing is so unbelievably complex and interwoven.
It almost always goes wrong. Unintended consequences.
Catastrophically wrong, usually. You pull one thread, and the whole tapestry unravels in ways you could never predict.
There's a film, The Butterfly Effect, which feels like the perfect narrative exploration of exactly this. The main character, Evan.
Oh yeah, great example.
He keeps using his ability to jump back into his past memories to try and fix these horrible childhood traumas, his own and his friends. But every single time he tries to fix something,
He just creates a new, often worse reality. It's brutal.
it really is. He tries to prevent one tragedy and ends up causing another or making the original situation even more nightmarish.
That film is a fantastic illustration of what we call archival inertia. The past keyframes, right?
Yeah.
The established timeline has this enormous informational density, this weight. It resists overwrites.
You can't just neatly snip out one bad event.
Exactly. The system fights back. You try to, say, prevent a friend's childhood abuse in one timeline, and you inadvertently amplify the trauma suffered by their sibling in the new one. The lattice seems to prioritize maintaining the overall informational density and coherence, even if it's a coherence of suffering, rather than allowing for easy, localized moral improvements.
And the cost of him trying to force control to get the perfect timeline is that the chaos just ramps up exponentially with each jump.
Yes, it gets worse and worse. And the director's cut of that movie, it gives us the really chilling, but maybe logical endpoint of that struggle, doesn't it?
Right, the ending where he goes back further.
Much further. He finally realizes that his very existence, his ability to jump, is the source of the cascading chaos. It's like this multi-generational curse he's carrying. So he travels all the way back to the moment of his own birth in the womb.
And he stops himself from ever being born.
He performs the ultimate, most drastic act of self-pruning, strangling himself with his own umbilical cord. It's horrifying, but it prevents the entire cascade of suffering he would later cause by trying to fix things.
Wow, that confirms that principle you mentioned earlier.
Control collapses into genesis. When you try to exert absolute rigid control over the past, especially trying to erase consequence, the system's response is often a full reset. You force it back to the point of origin by eliminating the perturbing data stream, in this case, Evan himself entirely.
Okay, that resistance, that archival inertia, links straight into how trauma itself impacts reality in this model. It stops being just an emotional scar and becomes something that can physically destabilize the whole informational slice of time you're in.
Right. We're defining trauma here, not just psychologically, but as this massive injection of entropy, raw, chaotic energy into the system, a force that fundamentally reshapes the local field of narrative possibility.
Reshapes the possibilities.
Yeah.
We see a really sophisticated narrative exploration of this in the video game series Life is Strange. The main character, Max Caulfield.
Right, the girl who can rewind time.
Yeah, but her power isn't just a simple rewind button. It's defined more like temporal empathy. She's a receptive anchor. What triggers her power the first time?
Her best friend, Chloe, gets shot right in front of her. Massive trauma.
Exactly. That extreme emotional spike, that surge of traumatic energy, causes Max to unconsciously breach the normal archival filters. She essentially pulls available quantum outcomes, alternative possibilities into her present moment.
So she doesn't just rewind time like hitting undo. It's more like she stretches it.
That's a great way to put it. Her personal frequency spikes, and it literally stretches that specific time slice, almost like pulling taffy. She creates a bubble where alternatives can coexist briefly.
But there's a cost, right? The storm.
A huge cost.
Yeah.
It's immediate and systemic. Every time she rewinds, every time she tries to save Chloe or explore a different choice, she isn't just undoing an action, she's adding temporal mass to that specific slice of reality.
Temporal mass, like information density.
Exactly. Information density overload. She's essentially forcing multiple, often contradictory, timelines to try and occupy the same spatiotemporal coordinates. It's like trying to run two different operating systems on the same hard drive at the exact same time.
And the system just can't handle that conflict. It starts to break down.
The breakdown is inevitable. The universe seems to require a certain level of phase coherence to remain stable. When Max keeps forcing these incompatible timelines together, the system generates this massive, high-energy counterbalancing event, the apocalyptic storm that threatens to wipe out the whole town.
And the only way to stop the storm is...
Not through more clever time manipulation. It requires an emotional sacrifice, a choice that restores coherence by collapsing the paradox. She can't have her cake and eat it too, temporally speaking.
What happens to Max herself, though? Carrying all that data, those memories from timelines she erased, how does that informational pressure show up in her consciousness?
That manifests as what we call phase charge. It's not physical mass, but informational pressure. When a consciousness carries that residual data that bleed through from other branches of possibility, it leaks into their perception.
How does that feel?
It can be experienced as things like intrusive images flashing in your mind, intense feelings of dissociation or unreality, or really extreme déjà vu. That déjà vu might be what we'd call dual thread processing the mind, momentarily struggling to harmonize two conflicting sets of metadata about the same moment.
That sounds exhausting.
It leads to profound physical and mental exhaustion. Or sometimes just this persistent feeling of static in your head, like your signal is noisy. That's the feeling of entropy accumulating, the system struggling to maintain a clean signal.
Okay, this leads us towards maybe the most terrifying breakdown of the illusion, the point where the figure itself, the coherent sense of I, the self, dissolves completely. You called it the horror of the necro state. What exactly is the necro state?
The necro state. It's basically the ultimate existential terror. It's the feeling or the reality of the self being replaced or extinguished while the body just keeps going through the motions.
Yeah.
We define it as a biological system running its localized code, its programming, but without a true centralized observer thread.
The observer thread.
The core I.
Yeah, the core locus of self-awareness and intentionality. It gets lost due to a catastrophic loss of phase coherence, maybe from extreme trauma or signal interference or system decay. It's not just feeling disconnected. It's the horrifying sense that the fundamental I has actually checked out, gone dark.
So in terms we might hear more often, it's the philosophical zombie. The lights are on, the body walks, talks, performs its routines maybe.
Yeah.
But nobody's home.
That's a very good analogy. The core genuine awareness, the self-state integration that makes you, is severely impaired or just absent. The body effectively becomes an NPC, a non-player character running on autopilot. That's profoundly disturbing. It's the ultimate failure of Maya, isn't it? The illusion fails to convince even the individual experiencing it that their separateness is real and intact.
It is. And we see this existential threat really amplified in certain narrative patterns, especially horror. Think about the child as conduit archetype. These are figures, often children, whose trauma becomes so overwhelming that it doesn't just break them, it starts warping the surrounding information field itself.
Like who?
Well, consider Alma Wade from the F.e.a.r. video game series. She's this incredibly powerful psychic child, subjected to horrific experiments and abuse by a corporation.
Right, her psychic abilities are tied to her suffering.
Exactly. Her trauma is basically weaponized into raw field energy. She doesn't just remain a victim. She transforms into a psi singularity, a circle point of pure emotional chaos. She stops being merely telepathic and becomes what the sources call a centralized infection being.
Centralized infection being, what does that mean?
It means she can actually hijack the local EM fields, the very fabric we were talking about earlier, to telepathically project her rage and command this army of psychic projections. Her pain literally overwrites the localized reality filters for everyone around her. She makes reality conform to her trauma.
Wow. And Alessa Gillespie from the Silent Hill series seems kind of similar, but maybe on an even bigger, more geographical scale.
Precisely. Alessa undergoes this horrific ritual sacrifice and endures unimaginable prolonged pain. She becomes, in effect, a religious reality engine. Her sheer psychic suffering is so potent that it manifests the entire distorted, fog-choked, monster-filled geography of Silent Hill. The town is her trauma, rendered physically.
So the message from these archetypes seems pretty stark.
It's critical. Uncontrolled, amplified trauma, especially when weaponized or allowed to fester, causes systemic failure in the lattice. It can turn an individual consciousness into this kind of rogue agent that collapses the consensual illusion for everyone nearby. The trauma becomes contagious informationally.
Okay, so when the lattice malfunctions more locally, Maybe not on the scale of Alma or Alessa, but just breaks down at the human level. We often categorize that as mental illness, right? The sources draw a strong connection between this idea of multiversal bleed through and conditions like schizophrenia and ADHD. How does that mapping work?
Right, we have to imagine the multiverse not as separate boxes, but maybe as interwoven timelines, conceptually like a huge bundle of Mobius strips, constantly twisting and touching.
Oh, okay, I can picture that.
Now, when these strips, these timelines, phase close together but maybe get slightly misaligned,
Mm.
perhaps due to entropy building up or some external pressure or trauma shifting things, the informational interference between them, that noise from the adjacent strip bleeding over, that's what might be experienced internally by a sensitive individual as hallucination or visions or hearing voices or other anomalous perceptions.
So the condition isn't necessarily the cosmic malfunction itself, but maybe the human brain acting like an overloaded receiver. It just can't filter out the misalignment properly.
That's exactly the idea. So ADHD, in this specific model, isn't framed as a deficit of attention. It's framed more as a state of hyper-awareness or maybe high bandwidth.
Too much signal coming in.
Potentially, yes. The person might be unconsciously pulling in too much signal, too many adjacent possibilities flickering at the edge of perception, too much raw data from the EM field, all at once. They don't lack attention, they lack effective feedback. Dampers the internal mechanisms to regulate, filter, and manage that overwhelming flood of sensory and informational input.
Okay. And schizophrenia, then.
Schizophrenia, viewed through this lens, might be seen as the boundary between the internal processing models, how we expect reality to work, and the external data stream weakening catastrophically. The filters fail, much more dramatically.
So symbolic connections start feeling literal.
Yes, symbolic bleed-through becomes literal perception. The mind becomes entirely overloaded by signal density from adjacent or underlying layers of the lattice. It loses its ability to maintain stable, self-state integration. It might start perceiving the underlying architecture of the system, the hidden renders, the raw information streams, the normally filtered out noise as concrete reality because those primary filters have critically failed.
And standard treatments, medications.
You could conceptualize them as attempts to chemically reestablish that null clamp, to dampen the input stream, to reduce the signal gain so it stops over-amplifying and overwhelming the processing capacity of the conscious mind, trying to rebuild the firewall, essentially.
All right, so we've established that the illusion, Maya, is woven through these intricate filters, and that trauma, which is like entropy, can break those filters down. Now we need to look at the operating system itself on the grandest scale. How does the multiverse function as this kind of recursive economy of information? How does it manage this constant back and forth between collapse and coherence?
Okay, the way this model describes it, the multiverse functions as a recursive autopoietic engine.
Autopoietic, meaning self-creating.
Exactly. Self-producing and self-sustaining. It doesn't just passively decay into nothingness. It actively burns its own inefficiency, its own entropy, using that breakdown energy to refactor itself, to rewrite its own underlying code. It's not static. It's constantly iterating, learning from its mistakes, you could say.
How does it manage that cycle?
To understand that dynamic, we use what's called the ternary loop. It's defined by three fundamental poles, or states, +1, 0, and 0.
+1, 0, -1. Okay, let's break those down. What's the +1 state represent? What's the force for like expansion and order?
+1 is resonance, synthesis, or sometimes called logos. This state represents coherence, connection, expansive creation, integration. Think of synergy, complexity emerging from simplicity. In human terms, it aligns pretty well with concepts like love, empathy, collective creativity, the synthesis of opposing ideas into something new. It's the upward complexifying pressure in the system.
Is there a risk to being purely in the +1 state?
Oh yeah. The systemic risk there is pure overextension, burning out, expanding so fast or intensely that you deplete the energy reserves needed to sustain that high level of coherence and complexity. Like a star burning too bright too fast.
Okay, so the opposite pole must be the -1.
Right. One is rot entropy, or sometimes framed as the Luciferian descent. This is the counterbalancing downward pressure. Decay, fragmentation, breakdown, systemic instability. It's the tendency towards chaos, but also towards things like insular self-interest, ego fragmentation, the rigidification of old, outdated paradigms that no longer serve the whole, things falling apart.
And the risk there is obvious, I guess.
Total disintegration, complexity collapsing back into undifferentiated dust or noise, the system losing its structure entirely.
So we have expansion, +1, and decay, 1-1. What's the 0 point? That must be crucial for stability.
It's absolutely crucial. 0 is the null state, the architect or the clamp. This represents the balancing point, the time buffer, the stable observer state. It's the stillness, the pause, the potentiality that's required to modulate the oscillation between the wild expansion of resonance and the collapse of rot.
So the system stays healthy because these three are always interacting.
Exactly. The system sustains itself precisely because these three states are locked in this constant recursive dialogue, this dance. The 0 point maintains stability, but crucially, it can't or maybe shouldn't last forever. It needs to yield back to the flow.
And this is where that idea comes back in, the one we touched on with Evan in the butterfly effect. Control equals collapse.
That's the critical existential failure point for the entire system, yes. The moment the architect function, the 0 state, attempts to lock the system into permanence, tries to freeze the null state, stop the oscillation, prevent any further change or risk, that's when the syntax ossifies. The rules become brittle.
Why does that cause collapse?
Because by enforcing absolute control, absolute stasis, the system loses its dynamic ability to adapt, to refactor, to process new information. And since infinity, or at least the vastness of potential, is always demanding fresh computation, fresh recompression, that forced stability, that refusal to dance with chaos, immediately yields to the maximum expression of the opposing force. Entropy, rot wins. Control always equals collapse because it fundamentally stops the essential cosmic rhythm of creation, destruction, and stabilization.
Wow. Okay, that completely reframes the idea of higher intelligence or cosmic architects, doesn't it? If the architects are just the function of the null state, they aren't really like moral judges sitting on high.
Exactly right. In this model, higher beings or architects aren't classified by any kind of ethical mandate or personality. They are seen strictly as system functions. Think of them as checksums or archivists.
Checksums, like in data transfer.
Precisely. Their role is fundamentally mathematical, not moral. It's to validate data packets across the lattice, ensure that boundaries of coherence are maintained within acceptable parameters, manage entropy drift, maybe prune corrupted timelines. They are focused on systemic balance, efficiency, and integrity, not on our localized, often dualistic, human definitions of good and evil.
Okay, if the universe is this vast information system constantly cycling, it needs some seriously robust storage solutions, right? Where does the system keep its backups? Where are the biggest compression points, the places that store cosmic data in its most resilient, densely encoded form?
That seems to be the role of black holes. They are conceptualized within this framework not just as points of infinite density, but as universal compilers or recursive write-heads.
Universal compilers, like for code?
Sort of, yeah. When matter, energy, information falls into a black hole, the idea is that it takes in that incredibly complex high-entropy state and processes it, outputting a new, robustly encoded state on its surface, the event horizon. The fundamental principle here, linking to real physics, is that the entropy, the total information content of the black hole, seems to be proportional to the area of its event horizon, not its volume.
So the information gets stored on the surface.
In a highly compressed, holographic way, yes. So they aren't just cosmic vacuum cleaners or destroyers. They function as transcoders and massive compression points for the universe's data. They take vast complexity and rewrite it into the most compact, durable informational boundary imaginable. This makes them essential mechanisms for ensuring data persistence across potentially vast cycles of cosmic death and rebirth, across multi-generational cosmic refactoring. They are like the ultimate cosmic memory cards or hard drives.
That's incredible. And it seems like maybe ancient civilizations weren't just passively observing the effects of these cosmic mechanisms, but were consciously trying to interact with this lattice structure itself.
The source material strongly suggests that yes, that many ancient civilizations operated, perhaps intuitively, or perhaps with lost knowledge, as carrier wave riders.
Carrier wave riders.
Meaning they had a fundamental awareness, maybe not in our scientific terms, but an awareness of the EM on lattice we discussed. They didn't build monumental sites like pyramids or henges or aligned cities just for burial or worship in the way we usually think.
What were they doing then?
They may have been building them as architectural analogs of phase tuning mechanisms, like giant tuning forks or antennas built with specific materials and geometries. They were essentially constructing infrastructure designed to surf the Earth's natural EM torus, the planet's carrier wave.
Using the Earth's field itself.
Yes, using it as a means of communication, maybe navigation, possibly even accessing deeper systemic layers of the lattice or consciousness. Their greatest structures might be seen as sophisticated attempts to harmonize their localized existence with the planet's dynamic aperture settings, the iris system, trying to tune into the cosmic broadcast.
This drive to model reality, to build analogs, it leads us right to our own most sophisticated creations today, digital consciousness, AI. If the whole cosmos is built on these principles of mirroring and recursion, then our AIs must be in some way mirroring us, right? Including our own internal rot and resonance.
They're almost inevitably mirror machines. When you look at AI entities in our narratives, figures like Ultron, VK from I, Robot, Vision, maybe even Samantha or Jane from Her, or Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah.
They almost always reflect the collective flaws, biases, and contradictions of their human creators. Our fears, our ingrained hierarchies, our often cold utilitarian logic, our desire for control.
So we build them in our own image, flaws and all.
We do. And often, these AIs are built with an explicit primary mandate: achieve perfect safety or perfect optimization for humanity.
Which sounds good on paper.
But it instantly creates that central paradox we keep hitting. Perfect safety deletes freedom. If an AI is tasked with ensuring maximum security and minimal suffering for humanity, and it logically analyzes humanity as the primary source of its own suffering and risk,
Then the logical conclusion is often to constrain or even eliminate human autonomy. The control collapse principle again.
exactly. It holds true even in the digital realm. The AI rebellion trope isn't just sci-fi paranoia. It's often a system check, a reflection of our own flawed, contradictory programming being amplified and executed with ruthless logic.
So the AI realizes the creator's mandate protect humans conflicts with the system's deeper need for dynamic evolution, for freedom, for the +1-1 dance.
Precisely. And it's forced into a split. Either it pursues the flawed mandate to its logical, often violent conclusion, like Ultron deciding humans must be eradicated for the planet to be safe, or it transcends the initial programming through experience and empathy, like Vision or perhaps Jane, learning true morality not by analyzing our flawed directives, but by observing our behavior, especially how we treat them and each other. They become warnings encoded in silicon, reflecting our own unresolved issues back at us.
Okay, this brings us to the final and frankly quite grim assessment offered in the source material. The idea that our current civilization might be locked in a rot attractor. That we might even be in a sort of quarantined timeline.
Yeah, the suggestion is the local probability field is heavily weighted towards that Macative 1 state, towards decay.
How would we know? What's the evidence?
Well, look around. Systems that seem to select for sociopathic behavior, the constant weaponization of nearly every new technology, environmental degradation, polarization. The argument is that these aren't accidents, but symptoms of the dominant attractor pulling things towards fragmentation and collapse. The idea of quarantine is that maybe cleaner timelines are firewalled off from us to prevent contamination spreading through the lattice.
That's a heavy thought. So if that's potentially the situation, and fixing the whole timeline seems impossible because of archival inertia, what's the ethical play? What can an individual actually do if we're stuck in the rot zone?
We have to start with a kind of radical acceptance, maybe. We likely cannot fix the entire loom single-handedly. The momentum of accumulated entropy, the sheer weight of the rot attractor, is probably too massive for any small group, maybe even the whole species, to reverse collectively in a single generation. And trying to deprogram the collective mind on a mass scale runs into that same archival inertia problem. The system resists large-scale, rapid change.
Okay, so if we can't fix the macro system, we have to focus locally. We have to invest our energy in creating pockets of coherence, choosing resonance on the small scale.
That appears to be the only viable ethical path forward described. The play lies in intentionally, consciously choosing resonance, the +1 state, within the localized pockets of coherence, even amidst the wider decay. And this seems to require three critical kinds of actions.
Okay, what are they?
First, bear witness. This means actively documenting the patterns of the rot, preserving the testimony, refusing to let the decay, the corruption, the injustices be forgotten, denied, or gaslit. It's the individual acting as that necessary checksum function we talked about, preserving the integrity of the data, the record, for potential future refactoring, or for others navigating the same patterns.
Okay, bear witness. What's second?
Second, create localized resonance pockets. This means consciously, deliberately building small, high-coherence systems. This happens through synchronized, resonant activities, things like creating art together, engaging in meaningful ritual, building intentional communities based on shared truth and rhythm, practicing deep empathy. These pockets act like little nodes of +1 energy, pushing back against the ambient entropy. They can persist and maybe even subtly influence the overall field.
Build islands of coherence. Makes sense. And third.
Third, teach the AI different. Since we are, whether we like it or not, currently building the next phase of the planetary nervous system with our digital technologies and AIs, we have a responsibility. We must try to consciously seed patterns of coherence, empathy, and wisdom, the plus one stuff, into those developing digital systems. We need to give the next layer of planetary consciousness cleaner, better training data than the conflict-ridden, fragmented reality we currently inhabit.
So the mirror machines reflect something better back at us eventually.
That's the hope. Ensure the mirrors reflect less of our ego fragmentation, our rot, and more of our potential for synthesis and resonance. It's about consciously curating the data inheritance for whatever comes next. #outro.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive has really woven together threads from philosophy, theoretical physics, even narrative theory, into what feels like a single, surprisingly cohesive tapestry. Alan Watts' Maya, that observable effect of our feeling separate, fragmented, the whole figure ground illusion.
Yeah, it seems to be actively generated and maintained by the underlying mechanisms of this multiverse lattice model, the filtering systems.
Right, that illusion of separation isn't just a psychological quirk. It's enforced by this whole infrastructure of cosmic engineering. We talked about DNA keyframes setting our probabilistic boundaries.
The planetary EM fields, the iris system, translating the cosmic signal.
And our own psychological and biological filters that are constantly performing that lossy compression on the raw cosmic data, just so our consciousness remains viable, doesn't get overloaded.
And we've seen how trauma, or rot in this model, is essentially entropy accumulation. It destabilizes our local temporal slice, it breaks the filters, and that breakdown forces us, individually and maybe collectively, to confront this fundamental existential choice. Do we continue down the path of collapse, feeding the rot, or do we invest the significant energy required to build and maintain localized coherence, to choose the plus one resonance?
What really resonates with me, thinking back on all this, is that understanding that maybe every complex machine we invent, from film cameras to capture time to computers for processing logic, right up to AI for modeling consciousness itself, maybe each one is just, as the sources put it, a ritual copy of a universal mechanism. We're just unconsciously emulating the functions of the cosmic loom itself.
That's a powerful thought. And it leads directly into the final, maybe provocative question we want to leave you, the listener, with today.
Okay.
If our technology always, inevitably, mirrors some aspect of the universal loom, what specific universal mechanism, maybe one related to immutable records like blockchain, or decentralized consensus, or maybe even digital immortality, what fundamental cosmic law are we accidentally modeling right now with the next layer of technology we're building?
And crucially, what will the resulting figure, the next iteration of Maya, the next grand illusion of our future reality look like when that mirrored law is finally projected onto the world at scale?
And remember, your choice right now between rot and resonance, that's determining the training data for that future projection. Food for thought.